Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 17th of March today. First of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,755,225 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government regional testing centres since the start of this pandemic. Of these, 1,543,995 have been confirmed negative. 211,230 have tested positive. There are 625 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This, of course, is an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 12 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,529. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 422 were in hospital last night, 38 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 1,981,818 people have now received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 181,879 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 125,831 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 141 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now to the National Records of Scotland update, and as of the 14th of March, 9,831 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, was mentioned on the death certificate, according to the statistics published by the National Records of Scotland today. In the week from the 8th till the 14th of March, 104 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, a decrease of 38 deaths from the previous week. Over 80% of the deaths this week occurred in hospital, representing 86 deaths. 14 deaths occurred in care homes and 4 at home or in non-institutional settings. Deaths from all causes are below average for this time of year. This week there were 90 fewer deaths when compared with the 5-year average. This is the first time since October that deaths have been below average, apart from the week of the 11th to the 17th of January, when the statistics were affected by the Christmas holiday period. Just before I carry on with tonight's news, just a brief apology to you for our late start this evening. This was just due to a technical problem which we've now rectified. Now to tonight's main headlines. ScotRail is to move into Scottish Government ownership. ScotRail services will be provided within the Scottish Government ownership from the expiry of the current ScotRail franchise, currently expected in March 2022. Speaking in a statement to Parliament today, the 17th of March, Transport Secretary Michael Matheson announced that ScotRail services will be provided within the public sector by an arm's-length company owned and controlled by the Scottish Government. This is a result of the Scottish Government's decision to run ScotRail service through what is known as Operator of Last Resort. He also announced that work is underway to put in place further emergency measures agreements, or EMAs, for ScotRail and Caledonian Sleeper franchises for the period of the 1st of April until September this year. Now, more powers to protect domestic abuse victims are coming up. The legislation has been passed, giving more powers to police and courts to protect people at risk of domestic abuse. The Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Bill will enable police and courts to ban suspected abusers from re-entering the home and from approaching or contacting the person at risk for a period of time to enable them to consider their long-term options around safety and housing. The bill will also allow social landlords to end or transfer tenancy of a perpetrator of domestic abuse to the victim. Together, these measures should reduce the risk that victims of domestic abuse end up having to become homeless in order to escape their abuser. Now, the vaccination programme is reaching 2 million people. Scotland's vaccination programme has delivered first doses of COVID-19 coronavirus vaccine to more than 2 million people. That's 44% of the adult population. The landmark was reached on Wednesday, the 17th of March. 60-year-old Ian Love from Dunnipace was among those vaccinated on the day the milestone was reached. The engineering manager received his first dose at Forth Valley College's Stirling campus, one of a number of community venues being used to deliver the vaccine locally in NHS Forth Valley. The National Vaccination Programme continues to move through Groups 6 and 7 on the priority list, which includes those with particular underlying health conditions and unpaid carers. A self-referral online service has been launched to enable any eligible unpaid carers who have not received an invitation to register themselves. As Groups 6 and 7 progress, we have begun scheduling appointments for the next priority groups, which are Group 8, that's 55 to 59-year-olds, and Group 9, it's age 50 to 54 years. And vaccinations for these groups began at the start of this week. Now, Scotland's testing strategy, here's Scotland's testing strategy update, I beg your pardon. Public Health Minister Mary Gougeon has today published an updated testing strategy for Scotland, setting out how testing will support the easing of restrictions and a return to everyday activities. It includes £13 million of investment in the 2021 and 22 period to establish Scotland's own genomic sequencing service to track new coronavirus COVID-19 variants and to manage any future outbreaks. Capable of identifying the genetic origins of up to 1,000 cases a day when fully built, the service will support Scotland's preparedness for any future pandemics, as well as all other threats such as antibiotic resistance. Scotland's testing strategy update sets out how existing testing routes will continue and be expanded to help suppress COVID-19 to the lowest possible level, alongside other measures such as vaccination and the levels system. This includes the existing testing routes that are in place in hospitals, care homes and schools, as well as the wider community testing to spot asymptomatic cases in high prevalence areas. Proposals for targeted community testing have been agreed with 20 local authorities across 8 NHS board areas so far. There are now 28 asymptomatic test sites or ATSs and 12 dedicated mobile testing units or MTUs providing access to community testing for people with and without symptoms in these areas, with many more sites now planned to open shortly. And now to homelessness and universal credit. A new report reveals how the introduction of universal credit has contributed to homelessness in Scotland. The report highlights how people can lose their homes due to problems with a 5-week wait to receive the first payment, and sanctions which lead to payments being withdrawn if claimants don't meet certain conditions. Scottish Government analysis in the report, titled Homelessness and Universal Credit, shows that universal credit has resulted in some tenants being forced into rent arrears and evictions, and has contributed to relationship and mental health problems. The universal credit caseload has nearly doubled since the beginning of 2020, meaning that more people than ever are at risk of being negatively affected. And now to news about the United Kingdom's plans to allow Hinkley reactors to start where cracks have been found. UK Office for Nuclear Regulation will allow 2 nuclear reactors at Hinkley Point, where cracks were found, to resume limited operations ahead of their scheduled closure in 2022, the regulator said today. Operated by France's EDF Energy, the 2 reactors at Hinkley Point B power station in Somerset in southwest England will each be allowed to operate for 2 periods of approximately 6 months each, the ONR said. The reactors were halted in February and in June 2020, and inspections have found cracks in the graphite bricks in the reactor's cores. The 280 megawatt reactors will undergo inspections between each period of operation to ensure the cracking does not compromise the safety requirements, the ONR has said. Now, Joe Biden says that political stability of Northern Ireland is important. The United States President, Joe Biden, expressed support on Wednesday for the Good Friday Agreement and said political stability in Northern Ireland is critically important as he marked St Patrick's Day with a virtual meeting with Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin. In his remarks, Martin said he looked forward to visiting Washington and he hoped that Biden would be able to visit Ireland. Now, white supremacist propaganda in the United States has hit a record in 2020. White supremacist propaganda in the United States, including racist, anti-Semitic and anti-LGBTQ messages, nearly doubled last year to a record level, according to the Anti-Defamation League. The New York-based advocacy group's data showed that 5,125 cases reported in 2020 compared to just 2,724 in 2019, even though incidents on college campuses dropped by more than half, possibly due to COVID-19 restrictions. Critics say that white supremacism got a boost from US President Donald Trump's recently ended presidency, although he denied racism and said he was smeared by political opponents. His successor, President Joe Biden, has ordered an assessment of the risk of domestic terrorism in the wake of the January 6th attack on the US Capitol by Trump supporters, some of whom displayed supremacist symbols. The ADL has said that a report on its website that supremacist propaganda appeared in every US state except Hawaii last year, with the highest levels of activity in Texas, Washington, California, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And now to helping communities through the pandemic. A combined total of £1 billion has been allocated to help local communities through the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic and to build resilience in public services in the past year. Of this, more than £550 million has been committed through the Communities Funding Package, launched a year ago this week. This has been distributed across councils, local services and initiatives supporting those in need. The key elements include more than £140 million on tackling food insecurity, with over £51 million to enable the continued provision of free school meals during school closures and public holidays. Help for local councils to meet people's needs over the winter period, with £40 million of financial insecurity funding and £30 million to help people impacted by COVID restrictions and guidance. In conjunction with the free phone National Assistance Helpline, councils have provided support to access and afford essentials, including food and fuel. Almost £80 million awarded to third sector and community organisations through the Wellbeing Fund, Supporting Communities Fund and the Third Sector Resilience Fund. And also the continuing Community and Third Sector Recovery Programme, which is expected to make £44 million of awards by this summer. On top of the £550 million communities funding package, a further £479 million has been awarded to local councils to meet demand for local services and to build resilience across the sector. And now to the subject of supporting women and girls through sport. The Scottish Government funding will help Comic Relief champion gender equality in Africa. Comic Relief projects that use sport to help address social issues affecting women and girls in Africa will receive additional funding from the Scottish Government. The joint Levelling the Field programme, which invests in organisations to support women and girls to reach their full potential in Malawi, Rwanda and Zambia, will receive an extra 500 million. I beg your pardon, I'm just reading this wrongly here. £500,000 for the second phase of its partnership work over the next 3 years. The programme, which works to ensure that women and girls are safe, equal and respected, empowering them and decision making, will also be extended by a year because of the coronavirus pandemic. The second Levelling of the Field programme will run until 2024, with the Scottish Government now investing £1.5 million in total and Comic Relief providing £885,000. The funding, announced ahead of Red Nose Day on the 19th of March, is being awarded to locally led organisations in Malawi, Rwanda and Zambia as part of the Scottish Government's commitment to increasing the amount of funding directly invested in partner countries. And that brings us to the end of the Scottish News this evening. I'd just like to remind you, of course, that Broadcasting Scotland is running a crowdfunder at the moment. So if you'd like to help us to be there through the major events of this year, then you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now. But that's it from Scotland at 7 this evening. Apologies for starting a little bit later than usual. I'll be back again tomorrow with another edition of Scotland at 7. But from all of us here in the studio this evening, a very good night to you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.